The rain had stopped about an hour ago, but the sidewalk was still wet and cold. Robert sat with his back against the brick wall of the Grandview Hotel, watching people walk past him like he was invisible. Some looked down at their phones. Others stared straight ahead. A few glanced at him for a split second before quickly looking away. He'd been living on the streets for almost 3 years now. 3 long years of sleeping in doorways, eating from donation centers, and wondering how his life had gotten so far off track. If someone had told him 5 years ago that this would be his future, he would have laughed in their face. Robert wasn't always homeless. He used to have a nice apartment on the east side of town. Nothing fancy, just a simple 1-bedroom place, with a small kitchen and a window that let in the morning sun. He had a job too, teaching music at a community center. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough. He loved watching kids learn to play their first songs, seeing their faces light up when they finally got a difficult piece right. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. His mother got sick. Really sick. Cancer, the doctor said. The treatments were expensive, more expensive than anyone could have imagined. Robert spent everything he had trying to help her. He took out loans, maxed out credit cards, borrowed from friends. When that wasn't enough, he took a second job working nights at a warehouse. His mother fought hard for 18 months. In the end, the cancer won. Robert lost her on a Tuesday morning in March. He remembered sitting by her hospital bed, holding her hand as she took her last breath. It was the worst day of his life. After the funeral, the bills kept coming. Medical debt, funeral expenses, loans that needed to be paid back. Robert tried to keep up, but he was drowning. He lost the second job first because he was too exhausted to show up on time. Then the community center had to make budget cuts and his position was eliminated. Within 6 months of his mother's death, Robert was evicted from his apartment. That's how he ended up here, on the cold sidewalk outside the Grandview Hotel. It was a nice hotel, the kind of place where people paid $300 a night for a room. The lobby had tall ceilings, shiny marble floors, and a huge crystal chandelier that sparkled like diamonds. Robert could see it all through the glass doors. What caught his attention most, though, was the piano. It sat in the far corner of the lobby, a beautiful grand piano with a glossy black finish. Well, it used to be beautiful. Now it looked forgotten. Dust covered the top, and Robert could tell, from where he sat, that nobody had played it in a long time. Some of the keys looked yellowed and worn. Every day, Robert watched that piano through the glass. He remembered when he could play. His fingers used to dance across keys just like those, creating music that made people smile. He'd spent years studying, practicing, teaching. Music was his whole life once. Now those days felt like they belonged to someone else, like a dream he'd woken up from. The evening shift was starting at the hotel. Robert watched the doorman in his fancy uniform greet guests with a smile and a polite nod. Businessmen in expensive suits walked in and out. Women in high heels and designer dresses laughed as they headed to the hotel bar. To all of them, Robert might as well have been part of the scenery, just another homeless person, another problem they didn't want to think about. Robert didn't blame them, not really. He understood. People are busy, caught up in their own lives and problems. Besides, looking at him probably made them uncomfortable. It reminded them that bad things can happen to anyone, that with enough bad luck, they could end up on the sidewalk too. A cold wind picked up, making Robert pull his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. November in Seattle was brutal when you didn't have a warm place to sleep. The shelter was full most nights, which meant spending the night outside, finding whatever dry spot he could. Sometimes the doorman at the hotel would look the other way and let Robert sleep in the alcove by the service entrance. But only sometimes, and only when the manager wasn't around. Robert shifted his position, trying to find a more comfortable spot on the hard concrete. His sign lay next to him, a piece of cardboard with simple words written in black marker. He didn't like holding it up anymore. The looks people gave him made him feel small. Some showed pity, others showed disgust. A few showed fear, like being homeless was contagious. It hadn't been a good day. Robert had managed to get $4 and some loose change, enough for a cheap burger from the fast food place down the street if he was lucky. It had been 2 days since he'd eaten anything more than the stale donuts someone had left at the mission. Through the glass doors, Robert could see the hotel guests gathering in the lobby. There seemed to be some kind of celebration going on. A group of young people in business clothes were laughing loudly near the bar. Their voices carried even out to the street. They looked happy, successful, like they didn't have a care in the world. Robert wondered what they were celebrating. A promotion, maybe? A big business deal? A birthday? Whatever it was, they were having fun. He watched one of them, a tall guy with perfectly styled hair, order a round of drinks. The man pulled out his wallet without even looking at the price. That wallet probably had more money in it than Robert had seen in months. The celebration got louder as the night went on. More drinks were ordered. More laughter echoed through the lobby. Robert could see them through the glass, living in a world that felt a million miles away from his reality. They were young, successful, and full of confidence. Everything Robert used to be before life knocked him down. One of the men in the group noticed Robert through the glass. Their eyes met for a brief second before the man looked away and said something to his friends. They all turned to look. Robert felt his stomach tighten. He knew that look. He'd seen it before. These guys weren't showing pity or sympathy. They were looking at him like he was entertainment. The tall one, the guy who'd been buying all the drinks, had a strange smile on his face. He was saying something to his friends that was making them laugh. A few of them pulled out their phones. Robert's instincts told him to get up and move, to find somewhere else to sit. But where would he go? This was his spot. Besides, he was too tired to walk anymore tonight. The hotel doors suddenly swung open. The tall man stepped out into the cold night air, his expensive shoes clicking on the wet sidewalk. He was walking, straight toward Robert with that same odd smile on his face. His friends followed behind him, phones raised and ready. Robert's heart started beating faster. After 3 years on the streets, he'd learned to sense when trouble was coming, and right now, every instinct he had was screaming that trouble had just walked out of the Grandview Hotel. The tall man stopped right in front of Robert, looking down at him with that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Up close, Robert could smell the expensive cologne mixed with whiskey. The man's friends hung back a few feet, their phones pointed in Robert's direction. He could see the little red recording lights blinking. "Hey there, friend," the man said, his voice too loud and too friendly. "Cold night, isn't it?" Robert had heard this tone before. It was the voice people used when they were pretending to be nice, but really weren't. He nodded slowly, not saying anything. Years of living on the streets had taught him that sometimes silence was safer than words. "My name's Connor," the man continued, swaying slightly on his feet. "My buddies and we've been having a great night. Got a promotion today. Big one. And you know what? We're feeling generous." The friends behind Connor laughed at something Robert didn't understand. One of them whispered loud enough for Robert to hear, "Dude, this is going to be hilarious." Connor pulled out his wallet and made a big show of looking through it. "Tell me something, friend. When's the last time you had a real meal? Not soup from a shelter. I'm talking about a real hot dinner." Robert's stomach growled at the mention of food. He hadn't wanted to admit it to himself, but he was starving. "It's been a while," he said quietly. "That's what I thought," Connor said, nodding like he'd just solved a great mystery. "Well, how would you like to earn yourself some dinner? And not just any dinner. A steak dinner from the hotel restaurant, plus let's say $100 cash. Sound good?" It sounded too good. Robert knew better than to trust easy money, especially from drunk businessmen with their phones out recording. But $100 would mean he could get a real meal, maybe even a night at a cheap motel with a hot shower. He could wash his clothes, sleep in an actual bed. "What do I have to do?" Robert asked, his voice careful. Connor's smile grew wider. He pointed back toward the hotel lobby, toward that dusty piano sitting in the corner. "You see that piano in... They're a beautiful instrument, right? Or at least it used to be. Thing's been broken for months now. Half the keys don't work, completely out of tune. The hotel's been meaning to fix it, but you know how these things go." Robert looked at the piano through the glass doors. Even from here, he could see the dust, the yellowed keys, the general neglect. His fingers tingled with a memory of music. "Here's the deal," Connor continued. "You go in there and play that piano for us. Just one song. Any song you want. You do that, and dinner and cash are yours. Easy money, right?" The friends behind Connor were barely containing their laughter now. One of them had his hand over his mouth, trying not to burst out laughing. Another was making sure his phone had a good angle. Robert understood immediately what was happening. This wasn't generosity. This was entertainment. They wanted to watch him fail, to record a homeless man fumbling over broken piano keys to have a funny story to share online. Robert felt something heavy settle in his chest. It was humiliation mixed with anger, mixed with desperation. 3 years ago, he would have told these guys exactly where they could go. He would have walked away with his head held high. But 3 years of hunger and cold nights had worn down his pride. Pride didn't keep you warm. Pride didn't fill your stomach. "The piano's really broken?" Robert asked. "Oh yeah," Connor said, laughing. "Totally messed up. But hey, you just need to play something. Anything. Doesn't have to be good. Just tickle those ivories for a minute or two and we'll call it square." Robert looked at the piano again, then at Connor, then at the friends with their recording phones. He thought about his mother, about how disappointed she would be seeing him like this. She'd always told him to never let anyone make him feel small. But right now, sitting on this cold sidewalk, he felt as small as he'd ever felt. "What do you say?" Connor pressed, pulling out 5 $20 bills and waving them. "Easiest $100 you'll ever make." Robert's hands were shaking, and not from the cold. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell these guys that he wasn't their circus act, that he was a human being who deserved respect. But then his stomach growled again, loud enough that Connor heard it and smiled even wider. "All right," Robert said, the word tasting like ashes in his mouth. "I'll do it." Connor clapped his hands together. "Excellent. This is going to be great. Come on, let's get you inside." Robert slowly got to his feet, his joints stiff from sitting on the cold ground. He gathered his few belongings, a backpack with everything he owned in the world. Connor was already heading back toward the hotel entrance, gesturing for Robert to follow. The friends formed a loose circle around them, phones still recording. As they walked through the revolving doors, Robert felt every eye in the lobby turn toward him. He was very aware of how he looked, his dirty clothes, his unwashed hair, the smell that came from living on the streets. A woman in a fur coat wrinkled her nose and moved away. A man in a business suit stopped mid-conversation to stare. The hotel manager, a middle-aged guy named George according to his name tag, immediately started walking toward them. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but we have a strict policy about—" "Relax, George," Connor cut him off, flashing his room key. "He's with us. Just a bit of harmless fun. We'll be gone in 5 minutes." George looked like he wanted to argue, but Connor was clearly a paying guest. The manager's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, crossing his arms and watching with disapproval. Robert walked slowly toward the piano, feeling like every step took forever. The lobby had gone quiet. People were watching now, some curious, others annoyed by the interruption. Connor and his friends positioned themselves for the best camera angles, barely containing their excitement. When Robert reached the piano, he stood there for a moment, just looking at it. The bench was dusty. The keys were indeed yellowed and chipped in places. He could see that several keys were stuck, probably from years of neglect and humidity. This piano had once been someone's pride and joy. Now it was just forgotten furniture, a prop for someone's cruel joke. Robert sat down slowly on the bench. It creaked under his weight. Behind him, he could hear Connor whisper to his friends, "Get ready. This is going to be gold. Wait until he realizes he can't even play Mary Had a Little Lamb on this thing." The laughter that followed was quiet, but cruel. Robert closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about walking away, about keeping whatever dignity he had left. But then he thought about the $100, about the hot meal, about sleeping somewhere warm tonight. He lifted the fall board, revealing all the keys. His hands hovered over them, trembling slightly. It had been so long since he'd played, so long since his fingers had created music instead of just holding cardboard signs. Would he even remember how? Robert took a deep breath and let his fingers find their position. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Behind him, phones were recording, expecting disaster. And Robert knew in that moment that he had a choice. He could give them what they expected, fumble through some broken notes and collect his money. Or he could remind them and maybe remind himself of who he used to be. His fingers touched the keys and he began to play. The first note came out wrong. The key stuck halfway down and made a dull thud instead of a proper sound. Behind Robert, someone snickered. He could hear Connor whisper, "Here we go." Robert pulled his hand back and looked at the keys again. Several were clearly damaged. Two in the middle didn't make any sound at all when he tested them. The ones that did work were badly out of tune, some sharp, some flat, creating a discord that made him wince. For a second, doubt crept in. Maybe he couldn't do this. Maybe 3 years of not playing had taken away whatever skill he once had. Maybe he should just walk away right now, forget the money, forget the food, and save himself from this humiliation. But then something strange happened. Robert's fingers found a memory they didn't know they still had. They moved to a different position, avoiding the broken keys, finding the ones that still worked. His mind began calculating, adjusting, compensating. If this key didn't work, he'd use that one. If this note was too sharp, he'd build the melody around it. He closed his eyes and started again. This time, music came out. Real music. He began with something simple, a piece by Chopin that his mother had loved. She used to ask him to play it every Sunday morning while she made breakfast. The memory of those mornings, the smell of coffee and toast, the sound of her humming along, it all came flooding back. Robert's fingers moved faster now, more confident. Yes, the piano was broken. Yes, half the keys were useless. But he'd spent 20 years of his life learning this instrument. He knew every trick, every technique, every way to make a piano sing, and right now, he was going to make this broken piano sing like it had never sung before. The first few bars were tentative, feeling out which keys worked and which didn't. But as Robert settled into the rhythm, something magical started happening. He wasn't just playing around the broken keys. He was using them, incorporating the stuck notes and off-tune sounds into something new. The piece wasn't Chopin anymore, not exactly. It was something else, something raw and real. Behind him, the snickering stopped. Robert didn't notice. He was somewhere else now, lost in the music. His hands moved across the keys like they were dancing, finding harmonies in places where harmonies shouldn't exist. Where a key was dead, he'd strike 2 others that created the same feeling. Where a note was sharp, he'd adjust everything else to make it sound intentional. The music filled the lobby, bouncing off the marble floors and high ceilings. It wasn't pretty in the traditional sense. It was rough around the edges, a little broken, a little sad, but it was honest. Every note carried 3 years of pain, of sleeping in the cold, of being invisible, of losing everything and everyone he'd ever loved. Connor's phone slowly lowered. His smile had completely disappeared. He stood there, mouth slightly open, staring at Robert's back like he was seeing a ghost. Around the lobby, conversations died mid-sentence. A couple walking toward the restaurant stopped in their tracks. The woman in the fur coat who'd wrinkled her nose earlier turned around. Her expression completely changed. George, the manager, stood frozen by the front desk, his arms no longer crossed, just hanging at his sides. More people emerged from the hotel bar and restaurant, drawn by the unexpected sound. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks stopped serving to listen. Hotel guests came out of the elevators and stood in the hallway, not wanting to move and break whatever spell was being cast. Robert transitioned smoothly into another piece, something by Beethoven this time. His fingers found the famous opening notes of the Moonlight Sonata, but again, this wasn't a perfect performance. It couldn't be, not with this piano, but somehow that made it better. The broken notes, the out-of-tune keys, they added something. They made the sad parts sadder, the dramatic parts more dramatic. A woman near the elevator started crying quietly. She didn't even know why. There was just something about the music, about the emotion pouring out of this forgotten piano that reached right into her chest and squeezed. Connor's friends had all lowered their phones now. They looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot, not sure what to do. This wasn't what they'd expected. They'd come for a laugh, for a viral video of a homeless guy making a fool of himself. Instead, they were witnessing something they didn't have words for. Robert's hands never stopped moving. Muscle memory took over, years of practice and teaching coming back like he'd never stopped. He remembered his first piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd taught him when he was 7 years old. She used to say that real music wasn't about hitting all the right notes. It was about making people feel something. Right now, Robert was making everyone in that lobby feel something. He played faster now, his fingers flying across the keys. Sweat met on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. This was more than just playing. This was 3 years of silence finally finding a voice. Every missed meal, every cold night, every person who'd looked through him like he didn't exist, it all poured out through his fingertips. The music swelled, building to something bigger. Robert leaned into the piano, his whole body moving with the rhythm. He hit the broken keys deliberately now, making their imperfection part of the song. A stuck key became a pause, a moment of tension. An out-of-tune note became a cry, a protest against the world's unfairness. People in the lobby started moving closer, forming a semicircle around the piano. They weren't thinking about where Robert came from or what he looked like anymore. They were just listening, caught up in something authentic and real in a way that their carefully controlled lives rarely allowed. An elderly man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd to get a better look. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He grabbed the arm of the woman next to him, his wife probably, and pointed at Robert with a shaking hand. "That's impossible," he whispered. "It can't be." Robert didn't hear him. He was building toward the finale now, every ounce of energy he had left going into these final moments. The music got louder, more intense. His fingers were starting to hurt and his back ached from the unfamiliar posture. But he couldn't stop, not yet. Not until every note that had been trapped inside him for 3 years was finally free. The lobby chandelier seemed to sparkle brighter. The marble floors seemed to glow. Or maybe that was just Robert's imagination. His mind painting the moment in colors it didn't really have. All he knew was that right now, in this moment, he wasn't a homeless man sitting on a cold sidewalk. He was a musician again. He was who he used to be, and then, as quickly as it had started, it was over. Robert played the final note, letting it hang in the air for a long moment before lifting his fingers from the keys. The sound echoed through the lobby, getting quieter and quieter until it finally faded into complete silence. Robert sat there, breathing hard, his hands still hovering over the keys. He was afraid to turn around, afraid to see their faces, afraid that the magic would break and he'd just be a homeless man again. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Then someone started clapping. The applause started with one person, then two, then suddenly the entire lobby erupted. It wasn't the polite clapping you hear at fancy concerts. This was real. People were on their feet, clapping hard, some of them shouting. The sound was almost as loud as the music had been. Robert sat frozen at the piano bench, his hands still trembling. He couldn't process what was happening. For 3 years, people had looked past him, around him, through him. Now they were standing and applauding for him. It didn't feel real. Slowly, he turned around. The crowd that had gathered was bigger than he'd realized. 30, maybe 40 people filled the lobby, all of them clapping. The woman in the fur coat had tears streaming down her face, her makeup running. The businessman who'd been on his phone earlier was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Even the waiters and hotel staff were clapping. George, the manager, stood at the front desk with his mouth open, looking completely stunned. Next to him, a young receptionist was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. But it was Connor that Robert noticed most. The tall man who'd offered him money as a joke stood completely still, his face red, his hands at his sides. His friends looked equally uncomfortable, their phones hanging limply in their hands. They'd wanted to capture humiliation. Instead, they'd recorded something beautiful, something they'd never be able to explain to the people who weren't there. The elderly man in the expensive suit pushed through the crowd. He was moving fast for someone his age, almost running. When he reached Robert, he grabbed him by the shoulders, his eyes wide and intense. "Robert Thompson," the old man said, his voice shaking. "You're Robert Thompson. I can't believe it. We all thought you were. We thought something terrible had happened to you." Robert stared at him, trying to place the face. It was familiar somehow, but the memories were fuzzy, like looking through dirty glass. "I'm sorry," Robert said quietly. "I don't—" "Mitchell. David Mitchell," the old man said. "You taught my daughter piano 20 years ago. Victoria. She studied with you at the music academy before you started teaching at the community center. You were the best teacher she ever had. You got her ready for her audition at Berkeley." The memory clicked into place. Victoria, a talented 12-year-old with red hair and freckles, always practicing harder than anyone else. Robert had spent extra hours with her, helping her perfect her technique. "Victoria," he said softly. Did she? She's a concert pianist now, David said, his voice full of pride and emotion. Performs all over the world. And she still talks about you, about how you changed her life. We looked for you a few years back, wanted to invite you to one of her concerts, but you'd disappeared. No one knew where you'd gone. Robert felt something break inside his chest. All this time he'd thought he was forgotten, that his life before meant nothing. But here was proof that he'd mattered, that he'd made a difference. What happened to you? David asked gently. How did you end up? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Robert knew what he was asking. My mother got sick, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cancer, the bills, they just kept coming. I tried to keep up, but he trailed off. The story was too long, too painful to tell standing in a hotel lobby. David's face softened with understanding. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. We're going to fix this, he said firmly. I still work in the music industry. I know people. We'll get you back on your feet. Before Robert could respond, George, the manager, stepped forward. He looked different now, his earlier irritation completely gone. Sir, he said to Robert, his voice respectful. I've been looking for a pianist for this lobby for 6 months. Can't find anyone who wants the job. Would you? I mean, if you're interested, the position is yours. It comes with a decent salary, and I can talk to the owner about helping you find temporary housing while you get settled. Robert couldn't speak. His throat felt tight, his eyes burning. This was too much, happening too fast. Just 10 minutes ago, he'd been sitting on the sidewalk, invisible and forgotten. Now people were offering him jobs, talking about getting his life back. I don't understand, Robert managed to say. The piano, it's broken. George looked at the piano, then back at Robert, and for the first time that night he smiled. After what I just heard, I don't think that piano needs fixing. I think it's perfect exactly the way it is. The crowd around them started to break up, people returning to their dinners and drinks, but the atmosphere in the lobby had changed. People kept glancing back at Robert, smiling, nodding. Some came up to shake his hand, to tell him how much the music had moved them. Connor finally approached, his confident swagger completely gone. He looked young suddenly, younger than Robert had first thought. Just a kid, really, maybe 25, trying to act big in front of his friends. I'm sorry, Connor said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. That was messed up what I did. I don't know what I thought. I was being a jerk. He pulled out his wallet and tried to hand Robert several bills. Please take this. It's the least I can do. Robert looked at the money, then at Connor's face. The young man looked genuinely ashamed, his earlier cockiness replaced with something that looked like guilt and confusion. Keep your money, Robert said quietly. But maybe next time you see someone on the street, remember they're a person. They have a story. They had a life before whatever happened to put them there. Connor nodded, looking down at his expensive shoes. I'll delete the video, he said. I promise. No, Robert said, surprising himself. Don't delete it. Post it if you want, but maybe add something. Tell people what you learned tonight. One of Connor's friends spoke up, a shorter guy with glasses. We've already been talking about it, he said. We want to set up something, maybe a fundraiser or something, to help you get back on your feet properly. If that's okay with you. Robert didn't know what to say. He'd spent 3 years being invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted to help. It was overwhelming, almost scary. Part of him wanted to run back outside, back to the familiar cold sidewalk where at least he knew what to expect. But another part of him, the part that had just played that piano, wanted to stay, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, tugged on her mother's dress and pointed at Robert. The mother hesitated, then let the girl approach. The child looked up at Robert with big, curious eyes. Mister, she said in a small voice, that was really pretty. Can you teach me to play like that? Robert felt his eyes fill with tears. He knelt down so he was at the girl's eye level. I'd like that very much, he said, his voice cracking. I'd like that very much. The girl's mother smiled, a warm, genuine smile. We live in the city. If you're serious about teaching again, we'd love to have you as her instructor. David Mitchell put his hand on Robert's shoulder. I'm calling Victoria tonight. She'll want to know you're alive. And I'm calling some other people too. By tomorrow morning, you're going to have more opportunities, the Poe. And you know what to do with. George handed Robert a piece of paper with a phone number on it. Come by tomorrow morning. We'll get the paperwork started. And tonight you're staying here. I'll set up a room for you. No arguments. Robert looked around at all these faces, these people who 10 minutes ago didn't know he existed. The weight of 3 years of loss and pain and invisibility suddenly felt a little lighter. He wasn't magically fixed. He knew that. There would still be hard days ahead, still things to work through. But for the first time in 3 years, he had hope. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. Thank you." The crowd began to disperse again. People heading back to their lives, but something had shifted in that lobby. Something important had happened. Something that would be talked about for years to come. Not just about a homeless man who could play piano, but about what it means to really see people. To remember that everyone has worth. Everyone has a story. 6 months had passed since that night in the hotel lobby. Robert stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his small apartment, adjusting his tie. It was a simple one-bedroom place, nothing fancy, but it was his. He had a bed, a kitchen, running water that was always hot. Things he'd once taken for granted, but would never take for granted again. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an older building on Pine Street. The rent was reasonable, and it came partially furnished. Robert had added his own touches over the months. A small bookshelf with music books he'd slowly been collecting. A coffee maker someone from the hotel had given him. A framed photo of his mother that David Mitchell had helped him track down from storage. Robert looked at himself in the mirror. He'd gained back some of the weight he'd lost, his face less hollow, his eyes clearer. Regular meals and sleep had done wonders. So had having a purpose again, a reason to get up each morning. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from George at the hotel reminding him about tonight's performance, as if Robert could forget. He played at the Grandview Hotel 3 evenings a week now, Tuesday through Thursday. The crowds had grown steadily over the months. People came specifically to hear him play that old broken piano that George had decided never to repair. "It tells a better story this way," George had said, and he was right. That imperfect piano with its stuck keys and out-of-tune notes had become something special. Guests would request it in their reservation notes. "We want to stay at the hotel with the piano player," they'd write. Robert grabbed his jacket and headed out. The walk to the hotel took 15 minutes, a route he now knew by heart. He passed the corner store where Mrs. Kim always waved at him through the window. He passed the coffee shop where the barista had his order memorized. Regular life. Normal life. The kind of life he thought he'd lost forever. When he reached the hotel, he no longer had to go through the front entrance hesitantly, wondering if someone would ask him to leave. Now the doorman greeted him by name. "Evening, Robert. Good crowd waiting for you tonight." The lobby had changed in small ways. There were comfortable chairs arranged near the piano now, creating a small performance space. Soft lighting that made everything feel warm and intimate, but the piano itself remained the same, broken keys and all. Robert set his things down and sat at the bench. His fingers found their familiar position on the keys. Before he started playing, he looked around the lobby. There were the usual hotel guests, some he recognized from previous weeks. But tonight there were also some special visitors. David Mitchell sat in the front row with his wife and daughter. Victoria had flown in from Boston just for tonight. She'd gotten taller, her red hair now cut short, but she still had those same determined eyes. Next to them sat Connor and 2 of his friends from that night 6 months ago. Connor came every few weeks now, always staying for the entire performance, never pulling out his phone. The little girl who'd asked Robert to teach her was there too, sitting with her mother. Her name was Lily, and she'd become Robert's first official student. Every Saturday morning she came to the hotel for lessons. She was progressing fast, reminding Robert why he'd loved teaching in the first place. There were others too, people whose faces had become familiar over the months. The elderly couple who came every Tuesday, the businessman who'd rearranged his travel schedule so he'd always be in Seattle on Robert's performance nights, the young woman who'd been going through a divorce and said his music helped her feel less alone. Robert began to play. He started with Chopin like he often did, but he'd learned to make the broken piano sing in new ways. He'd composed his own pieces too, songs that were written specifically for this imperfect instrument, that made its flaws sound intentional and beautiful. As he played, his mind wandered to the past 6 months. After that first night, things had moved quickly. David had made good on his promise, connecting Robert with people in the music industry. Within a week, Robert had 3 potential teaching positions. He'd chosen to work with the Community Arts Center, the same one where he'd taught before but in a different location. Connor's fundraiser had been more successful than anyone expected. The video of Robert playing had gone viral, but not in the cruel way Connor had originally intended. Instead, it became a story about second chances, about not judging people by their circumstances. The fundraiser raised over $30,000. Robert had used some of it to get his apartment and buy necessities. The rest he'd donated to the homeless shelter that had helped him during his hardest nights. Teaching again had been strange at first. Robert worried his students would judge him, that parents wouldn't want their kids learning from someone who'd been homeless. But David had advised him to be honest about his story, and it turned out honesty was the right choice. If anything, his experience made him a better teacher. He understood struggle now in a way he never had before. He knew what it meant to fall down and have to find the strength to get back up. The music flowed from Robert's fingers, filling the lobby with sound. He transitioned into a piece he'd written last month, something that captured both the pain of his 3 years on the streets and the hope of finding his way back. It started dark and melancholy, then slowly built toward something lighter, something that felt like sunrise after a long night. When he finished the set an hour later, the applause was warm and genuine. People came up to talk to him afterward like they always did. Victoria hugged him tight, tears in her eyes. "You taught me that music comes from the soul," she said. "Tonight I remembered why I fell in love with piano in the first place." Connor approached with his friends. The young man had changed over the months. He volunteered at the shelter now, serving meals twice a month. "We're organizing another fundraiser," he told Robert, "but this time it's for the shelter's music program. We want to buy instruments, set up lessons, help people find what you found in that piano." Robert felt his chest tighten with emotion. "That's a wonderful idea." Lily and her mother were next. The little girl bounced excitedly. "I practiced every day this week," she announced proudly. "I can almost play the whole song now." "I know you can," Robert said, ruffling her hair. "You're one of my best students." After everyone had left, Robert sat alone at the piano for a few more minutes. George was closing up the bar, giving him time. Robert played quietly, just for himself. He played for his mother, who he still missed every single day. He played for everyone still sleeping on cold sidewalks, hoping they'd find their way home too. He played for second chances and broken things that still make beautiful music. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Hi, I saw your video online. My name is Jennifer. I lost my job last year and I'm struggling. Your story gave me hope. Thank you for not giving up." Robert stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you for reaching out. Please don't give up either. Things can change. I'm living proof." He stood up from the piano and gathered his things. Tomorrow he had 4 students scheduled, including a teenager from the shelter who showed real promise. Next week he was meeting with David about possibly doing a small concert at a local venue. Regular life was full now, busy in the best way. As Robert walked home that night, he passed the corner where he used to sit with his cardboard sign. He stopped there for a moment, looking at the spot. A part of him would always carry those 3 years. The cold nights, the hunger, the feeling of being invisible. But those experiences had also taught him things he needed to know. About resilience, about dignity, about how quickly life can change, both for worse and for better. He pulled out his wallet and looked at the bills inside. He took out a 20 and left it tucked in the doorway where another person was sleeping, someone fighting their own battle. He didn't wake them. He just left the money and a note that said, "Things can get better. Don't give up." Robert walked the rest of the way home under the streetlights, his footsteps light, his heart full. He wasn't naive enough to think his struggles were completely over. Life would always have challenges. But he'd learned something important on that cold hotel sidewalk and at that broken piano. Sometimes your worst moments lead to your best ones. Sometimes you have to break before you can become something stronger. And sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you, really seeing you, to remember.